He watched from the shadowed corner as she settled into his chair, the exclusive bar falling into a tense silence. Every person in the room knew the unwritten rule, knew the territory she had just violated. They waited for the explosion, for the crushing display of power from the most feared man in the establishment. What happened next would rewrite every social script in the room. She was just a young woman celebrating a friend's promotion, completely unaware of the invisible lines she'd crossed. He was a man who built an empire on respect and fear. This is the true story of a single, shocking decision that defied every law of power, and the hidden wound that made it possible. To understand why he didn't destroy her, you have to go back to the moment his own world was shattered. 10 years before that night at the bar, Marco Santoro arrived in New York with $200 and a reputation for ending arguments with his fists. He didn't build his security empire through kindness. He built it by understanding that in certain circles, fear is a more reliable currency than trust. By 35, he controlled protection for half the upscale venues in Manhattan. His presence in a room wasn't just noticed, it recalibrated the entire social atmosphere. Men straightened their ties, women lowered their voices. He cultivated this aura deliberately. The corner booth at the vault, that exclusive members-only bar, wasn't just a seat. It was a throne, and everyone knew it. But power built on intimidation has a hidden cost. It isolates you. Marco's world became a series of transactions where respect was mandatory, but genuine connection was impossible. He lived in a penthouse with a breathtaking view and absolute silence. The only people who spoke to him without calculation were his two senior lieutenants, and even they measured every word. This was the man who walked into the vault that Tuesday night, his mood already darkened by a betraying business partner he just dealt with. He was primed for a display of dominance. He needed the predictable script of fear to reassert his equilibrium. Meanwhile, across town, Chloe Bennett was arguing with a broken zipper on her only nice dress. At 26, she was living the gritty reality of a New York dream that hadn't so much faded as never materialized. An art history degree led to a series of unpaid internships, which led to a job as a gallery assistant where her primary duties involved fetching coffee and soothing the egos of wealthy clients. Her best friend, Jess, had just landed a real promotion at a tech firm and insisted on celebrating at some impossibly exclusive bar her new boss belonged to. Chloe's budget allowed for one cocktail, carefully nursed for the entire night. She knew nothing about the social cartography of places like the vault. Her world was subway delays, rent splits, and roommates. The concepts of territorial seating and unspoken hierarchies belonged to a different universe. When Jess texted, "Got us in," Chloe felt a flutter of excitement. A night of pretending, of feeling, for just a few hours, like she belonged in the glittering city she worked so hard to just survive in. She had no idea she was walking into a perfectly arranged collision of two incompatible social dimensions. Back in his penthouse earlier that day, Marco had received the final piece of evidence against his partner, Alessandro. The betrayal wasn't just business, it was personal. They'd come up together. Marco handled the muscle, Alessandro the money. Now forensic accountants had traced missing funds to an offshore account, money skimmed from the very pension fund for their longtime employees. For Marco, whose code was built on loyalty to those who stood with you, this was the ultimate violation. The meeting that followed wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a warehouse. And when Marco left, Alessandro's career in New York was over. His body would heal, but his reputation, his standing, was erased. The act left a familiar ashen taste in Marco's mouth. Victory, but of the emptiest kind. This is the critical psychological state he carried into the bar. Research shows that high-status individuals, after asserting dominance, often experience a paradoxical drop in affective well-being. The act of coercion can leave the powerful feeling isolated. Marco was swimming in this exact emotional residue. He wasn't looking for another fight. He was, though he'd never articulate it, silently desperate for a human interaction that wasn't rooted in fear or calculation. His brain was subconsciously seeking a violation of the predictable script he himself had written. Chloe and Jess arrived at the vault at 8 p.m. The bouncer, a mountain of a man named Leo who worked for Marco, gave Jess's name a long look before nodding them through. The interior was all dark wood, low amber light, and the quiet hum of expensive conversation. Jess immediately spotted her colleagues at a high-top table. The only empty seat in their vicinity was a lush, deep armchair in a corner nook, slightly elevated, with a perfect view of the door and the entire room. It looked inviting. It looked empty. To Chloe, a seat was a seat. She slid into it with a relieved sigh, her feet already aching from her heels. Every other patron in the bar understood the significance of that chair. It was like watching someone casually drape a coat over the crown jewels. The bartender froze, a glass in hand. Conversation stuttered. Leo, the bouncer, took a step forward, his face grim. The social atmosphere, that delicate ecosystem of unspoken rules, hung in the balance. The expected response was a swift, brutal correction, a public humiliation to reassert the hierarchy. That was the script. That was what 10 years of Marco Santoro's reputation demanded. But here's what the crowd didn't see. As Marco entered from the private back hallway and saw the young woman in his chair, laughing freely with her friend, something entirely unexpected happened. The rage didn't flare. Instead, he was struck by a visceral memory, so sharp it was almost physical. He saw his younger sister, Isabella, laughing in exactly that unguarded way years ago before life hardened her. He remembered the last time he'd seen genuine, uncalculated joy in his own presence. The memory was a punch to a bruise he didn't know he had. His brain, conditioned for conflict, scrambled. The neural pathways built for aggression fired, but they collided with this sudden, disarming wave of melancholic recognition. Psychology tells us that unexpected stimuli can cause a predictive coding error in the brain, forcing a rapid cognitive reassessment. Marco's entire system was in recalibration. For 3 full seconds, he just stood there, his notorious composure broken by internal chaos. Leo moved toward Chloe, his hand outstretched to remove her. Marco's voice, low but carrying absolute authority, cut through the tense silence. "Leo, stand down." The command was so contrary to expectation that the bouncer literally jerked to a halt, confusion etched on his face. Marco's eyes never left Chloe. He took a deliberate breath, the kind you take before stepping off a ledge. And then he did the one thing no one, least of all himself, could have predicted. He walked toward her, not with menace, but with a calm purpose that was infinitely more terrifying to the watching crowd. The cliffhanger wasn't what he would do to her. The cliffhanger was what this deviation from his own ruthless code would now do to him. The silence in the vault became absolute, a vacuum where sound itself seemed to retreat. Marco Santoro stopped 3 feet from the chair, his shadow falling across Chloe's terrified face. And then he broke the single most important rule of his own empire. He smiled. It wasn't the sharp, threatening smile his associates knew. It was something softer, almost wistful. "That's a good chair," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Best view in the house." Chloe could only stare, her mind unable to process the disconnect between the man's reputation and the man now speaking to her. Jess had gone pale, her hand frozen halfway to her phone. Marco didn't order her out. He didn't assert dominance. He did something far more destabilizing. He pulled over a stool from a nearby table and sat down, effectively joining them. To the watching crowd, this was incomprehensible. A territorial violation had not been met with defense, but with incorporation. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt writes that when a hierarchy is violated and the high-status individual doesn't enforce the rules, it creates cognitive dissonance in the group. The entire ecosystem of the bar was now in dissonance. Leo, the bouncer, looked to Marco's lieutenant, a sharp-faced man named Victor, who simply gave a minute shake of his head. The script was gone. "Celebrating something?" Marco asked, his eyes on Chloe's cocktail, not on her. His posture was open, non-threatening. The performance of power had been replaced by the performance of normality. Chloe, operating on pure adrenaline, managed a nod. "My friend, promotion." Her voice was a whisper. Good, Marco said, and he meant it. In that moment, he wasn't Marco Santoro, security mogul. He was a man remembering what it felt like to be happy for someone else's simple, clean success. A memory untainted by betrayal or leverage. He stayed for exactly 90 seconds, asked the name of Jess's firm, nodded again. Then he stood, placed a hand briefly on the back of his chair, and said, "Enjoy your night, ladies." He turned and walked to the bar, where Victor immediately handed him a drink, his face a mask of controlled confusion. The fallout was instant but silent. For the rest of the evening, a 10-foot radius of respectful space remained around Chloe. The bartender sent over a second round of drinks on the house. Jess's colleagues viewed her with new, bewildered respect. But beneath the surface, tectonic plates were shifting. Victor waited exactly 22 minutes before approaching Marco at the bar. "Boss, a word." They moved to the back office. Victor didn't mince words. "What was that?" Leo was ready to handle it. Quietly, Marco stared at his lieutenant, seeing not concern for protocol but fear. Fear that the cornerstone of their operation, predictable, terrifying authority, had just developed a crack. "She wasn't a threat, Victor," Marco said, his voice flat. "She was a kid in a chair." "It's not about her," Victor pressed, his voice low. "It's about everyone who saw. Alessandro's people are still out there. They see a hesitation, they smell blood." This was the first concrete consequence. Marco's unexpected kindness was immediately framed as a strategic vulnerability by his own second-in-command. Meanwhile, Chloe and Jess left an hour later, floating on a wave of surreal adrenaline. Outside, Chloe finally breathed. "Who was that?" Jess, whose new corporate world brushed against these shadowy edges, whispered back. "That was Marco Santoro, and you just lived." They didn't understand that living was only the beginning. By the next morning, the story was already mutating. In the finance firm gossip channels, Jess was now connected. In the restaurant and nightlife underworld, the tale grew taller. Santoro had taken a liking to some girl. He'd bought her table drinks. He'd smiled. Each iteration sanded down the nuance, transforming a complex psychological moment into a simple, dangerous narrative. Marco Santoro had a soft spot. This narrative reached ears that mattered. 2 days later, Marco sat in his downtown office, a sparse, elegant room that felt more like a gallery than a place of business. Victor laid a photograph on the desk. It showed Chloe leaving her apartment building in Brooklyn, taken from across the street. "Why do you have this?" Marco's voice dropped 20 degrees. "I don't," Victor said carefully. "This was intercepted from a guy named Dempsey, freelance surveillance. He was hired yesterday to follow her." Marco picked up the photo. Chloe was wearing headphones, carrying a tote bag, oblivious. The invasion of her ordinary life felt like a physical violation. Who hired him? Traced to a shell corporation. But the style, it's familiar, could be remnants of Alessandro's crew testing the waters, seeing if this girl is actually a lever they can pull. The stakes had just escalated from social awkwardness to physical danger. Marco's single deviation from type had painted a target on an innocent woman's back. Here comes the pivot. The reason Marco's memory of his sister Isabella was so devastating. Isabella wasn't just a nostalgic memory. She was a ghost haunting every protective decision he made. 8 years earlier, Isabella, then 22 and full of the same bright energy Chloe had displayed, had been dating a man in a rival outfit. Marco had forbidden it. They'd argued. He'd used his dominance, his fear-based control, to try to force her obedience. She'd left his apartment in tears. That night, she'd been with her boyfriend when a deal went violently wrong. She was caught in the crossfire, a stray bullet. She lived, but the damage to her spine was permanent. She'd been confined to a wheelchair ever since, and she hadn't spoken to Marco in 7 years. His last attempt to use force to protect someone had resulted in catastrophic, permanent loss. When he saw Chloe laughing in his chair, he wasn't just seeing his sister. He was seeing a chance to make a different choice. A choice not of dominance, but of restraint. But the world he lived in only understands one language: power, and restraint is often mistaken for weakness. Marco made a decision. Pull Dempsey off the street, have a conversation with him, find out who paid him, and make it clear this is a dead-end street. Victor nodded, but his eyes were troubled. "And the girl? She's not involved, Marco said firmly. She's a civilian. Boss, Victor said, the word heavy with implication. She's involved now. They've made her involved. Ignoring it won't make her safe. It makes her look like a weakness you're trying to hide. This was the institutional trap. To protect Chloe truly, Marco would have to engage. And to engage would be to confirm to his enemies that she mattered. It was a perfect, vicious circle. Chloe's life began to change in subtle, inexplicable ways. The following week, her landlord, who had been threatening eviction over a late payment, suddenly reversed course and offered her a lease renewal at the same rate. When she went to her struggling neighborhood gallery, her boss announced a mysterious angel donor had funded a new assistant curator position and offered it to her with a salary that made her gasp. She felt like she was living in a dream where unseen hands were smoothing her path. She didn't connect it to Marco Santoro. She thought maybe her luck had finally turned. This is the insidious power of indirect influence. The recipient often doesn't trace the source, but lives with the unnerving sense of unearned grace. Marco, however, was navigating a gathering storm. The demotion of Alessandro had left a power vacuum in certain distribution networks. A crew from Queens, led by a pragmatic but ruthless man named Karloff, saw an opportunity. Karloff didn't attack with guns, he attacked with whispers. The story of the girl in the chair was perfect fuel. In meetings with club owners and restaurant managers, Karloff's lieutenants would casually mention, "Heard Santoro's gone sentimental. Maybe he's losing his edge." In the economy of fear, perception is everything. 3 long-term clients, high-end nightclubs in meatpacking, called Victor to explore other options. The bill for Marco's moment of humanity was coming due, and the currency was territory. Victor presented the client losses to Marco with the grim air of a doctor delivering bad news. Karloff is offering them lower rates and a firmer hand. They're saying they need stability. Stability was code for predictable, fear-based enforcement. Marco looked out over the skyline. He had built this view with his own 2 hands, through sheer force of will. Now, because he hadn't yelled at a young woman, it was beginning to crumble. The psychological weight was immense. Studies on power suggest that high-status individuals who deviate from group-enforced norms experience intense social punishment, often disproportionate to the transgression. Marco was being punished not for an act of weakness, but for an act of atypicality. He made another decision, one that would pull Chloe directly into the orbit she feared. He couldn't have her watched openly without confirming her importance, but he couldn't leave her unwatched while Karloff's people were sniffing around. His solution was a masterpiece of oblique protection. He contacted the owner of the gallery where Chloe worked, a man who, it turned out, owed Marco a significant, non-monetary favor from years past. The arrangement was simple. Chloe gets the promotion, the gallery gets a generous donation, and the gallery hires a new, highly competent security consultant to assess its insurance needs. That consultant was one of Marco's most discreet operatives, a woman named Anya whose job was to keep Chloe safe without ever letting Chloe know she existed. The web around Chloe was tightening, woven from both protection and hidden danger. The tension exploded from an unexpected direction. Isabella, Marco's sister, saw a blurred photo in a tabloid column about nightlife power players. It showed a grainy image of Marco talking to a young woman in a bar. The caption speculated about a new mystery woman. Isabella, who monitored her brother's life from a bitter distance, saw something else. She saw the expression on his face, an expression she hadn't seen since before her accident. Not calculation, but a kind of sad recognition. For 7 years, she had believed her brother saw the world only as a chessboard of power. This photo suggested something else. Against every bitter instinct, she picked up the phone and called him. When Marco heard her voice, he actually stumbled, bracing himself against his desk. Her question was simple. Who is she, Marco? And for the first time, he told his sister the truth. Not the strategic truth, but the human one. She's no one, Bella. She's just a reminder of what we lose when we always choose to be hard. That conversation changed everything. It reopened a channel Marco thought was sealed forever. It also gave Isabella a foothold back into his life. She began offering sharp, insightful commentary on his situation, analyzing it not as a criminal enterprise but as a human drama. "They think you're weak because you were kind," she told him from her wheelchair in her Brooklyn apartment. "So show them the strength in it. But for God's sake, don't drag that poor girl into the show." Isabella became Marco's unexpected moral compass, a connection to the man he was before the empire hardened him. Meanwhile, Chloe, in her new role at the gallery, began planning her first independent show. The theme was Unseen Boundaries, exploring the invisible social and architectural lines that divide cities. The irony was breathtaking. She was curating a show about the very forces that had collided in her life, completely unaware she was living its central case study. Anya, her unseen protector, reported her progress to Marco with dry amusement. Marco found himself asking for more details than were strictly necessary for security. What artists was she selecting? What was her vision? He was becoming invested in her success, not as a protector, but as a patron. The line between obligation and genuine interest was blurring. This blurring did not go unnoticed. Karloff's people, frustrated that indirect pressure wasn't yielding faster results, decided on a more direct test. They chose not to attack Marco nor to kidnap Chloe, too blatant. They chose to vandalize the gallery. One night, windows were smashed and the upcoming show's promotional materials were shredded. A message was spray-painted on the wall: "Sentimental debts get paid." It was a masterstroke. It attacked Marco's interests without directly attacking him, and it terrorized Chloe in her new, fragile sanctuary. When Chloe arrived to the destruction the next morning, she broke down. This wasn't random. This felt personal. For the first time, she felt the cold breath of the shadow world touching her life, but she still couldn't see its face. Marco was in a meeting when Anya's alert came through. He excused himself, his face like stone. Karloff had crossed a line. He had moved from whispers to actions that harmed Marco's interests, but more importantly, he had terrified an innocent woman. This was no longer about business territory. This was about a promise Marco had made to himself after Isabella's accident, a promise to never let his world bleed into the life of an innocent again. He had failed. The bridge between his two choices, the hard man and the man who remembered kindness, was burning behind him. He had to move forward, but forward now meant confronting the monster his own reputation had helped create. He turned to Victor, his eyes holding a cold fire his lieutenant hadn't seen in years. "Set up a meeting with Karloff. Neutral ground. Tonight." The escalation was complete. The kindness in the bar had become a casus belli. And Chloe Bennett, sipping her cocktail in blissful ignorance, was now the unwitting pivot point in a coming war. The meeting with Karloff was set for 11 p.m. at a 24-hour diner in Hell's Kitchen, a place with vinyl booths and no cameras. Marco arrived with only Victor, but the man who slid into the booth opposite them wasn't Karloff. It was a lawyer, crisp suit, leather briefcase. "Mr. Karloff sends his regrets," the man said, his voice pleasantly neutral. He felt a legal representative would better facilitate this dialogue. This was an insult disguised as procedure. It said Karloff didn't consider Marco worthy of a face-to-face meeting anymore. It also created a firewall of plausible deniability. Nothing said here could be held against Karloff directly. The lawyer laid out terms that were less a negotiation and more a surrender document. Marco would cede control of the meatpacking district clubs and 2 lucrative boutique hotel contracts. In return, Karloff's organization would guarantee the safety and privacy of all unrelated civilian parties, a barely veiled reference to Chloe. The message was clear: "Your moment of sentiment has given us a weapon. Pay up or we'll use it." Marco listened, his expression giving away nothing. When the lawyer finished, Marco leaned forward slightly. "Tell Karloff I heard his offer. My answer will be delivered personally." The lawyer blinked, expecting more. He got none. As they left, Victor was seething. He's not even showing his face. But here's what Marco understood that Victor didn't. Karloff's move was a sign of fear, not strength. Sending a lawyer meant Karloff was worried about a direct, violent confrontation. He was playing a corporate game, trying to win through leverage and contracts. This was Marco's world. He could work with this. The plan he formulated on the drive back wasn't about muscle. It was about information. Karloff had a son, a sophomore at an Ivy League college, clean, no involvement in the business. A point of sentimentality. Marco would never touch him, but he could make Karloff believe he might. He had Victor draft a completely legal, above-board scholarship donation to the son's university, earmarked for a department the boy was majoring in. The donation would be large, public, and traceable directly back to one of Marco's legitimate shell companies. The message would be silent but deafening. I see what you care about too. Let's keep our battles between us. While Marco plotted this chess move, Chloe was spiraling. The gallery vandalism had shaken her to her core. The police wrote it off as random, but the phrase "sentimental debts get paid" echoed in her head. It felt like a message from a play she hadn't auditioned for. Her friend Jess, now deep in corporate paranoia, did some digging through her new network and called Chloe, her voice tense. That night at the bar, that man, Santoro, he's not just a guy, Chloe, he's a problem. People are talking. They're saying that vandalism might be a message for him. The pieces finally clicked together with terrifying clarity. The promotion, the landlord, the surreal protection in the bar. It wasn't luck. It was the fallout from a single, accidental encounter with a dangerous man. This is where Chloe did something extraordinary. Instead of hiding, she decided to understand. She used her art researcher skills. She started quietly looking into Marco Santoro, public records, old newspaper archives, business registrations. She built a profile not of a monster, but of a person. She found the obituary for his parents, who died in a small plane crash when he was 19. She found a single old Society page photo of him and a younger woman at a charity gala. His sister, Isabella, before her accident. Chloe, an expert in reading visual language, saw the protective way his hand rested on his sister's shoulder. She saw a man, not a myth. This research changed her fear into a more complex, uneasy empathy. She still wanted nothing to do with his world, but she stopped seeing him as a mere predator. He was a person who had built a fortress of fear, perhaps because he had something, or someone, he was desperately afraid of losing. Marco's donation to the university went through. The effect was immediate. Karloff didn't call, he showed up. 2 nights later, as Marco was leaving a midtown gym, Karloff's black sedan pulled up beside him. Karloff himself rolled down the window. He was a big man with a careful, quiet voice. The scholarship was elegant, Karloff said, no greeting. Unnecessary. My boy is none of your business. The girl at the gallery is none of yours, Marco replied, not breaking stride. We have a misunderstanding, Karloff said. I don't vandalize art, it's crude. Marco stopped. If Karloff wasn't behind the gallery attack, then who was? The plot thickened instantly. The message was for you, Karloff continued. But not from me. Someone else is stirring the pot, trying to make us fight so they can pick up the pieces. He rolled up the window and drove away. The enemy had just multiplied. Marco's mind raced. The list of potential someone else's was long. Remnants of Alessandro's crew, a rival from New Jersey, even a disgruntled former client. The attack hadn't been business, it had been manipulation. And it had worked perfectly, pushing him and Karloff to the brink. He needed to find the puppet master. But first, he had to stabilize the immediate threat to Chloe. The unseen protector, Anya, wasn't enough anymore. The game had changed. He made a decision that broke every remaining rule of his operational playbook. He called Isabella. I need you to meet someone. Isabella, who had been cautiously rebuilding a relationship with her brother, was silent for a long moment. The girl from the bar. Yes, Marco admitted. She's in the crossfire because of me. I can't approach her. It will make it worse. But you could. He proposed a cover. Isabella, as an art lover and occasional benefactor, would visit the gallery to discuss a private commission, expressing particular interest in Chloe's Unseen Boundaries show. It was plausible. It would put a benign, friendly face near Chloe, a face connected to Marco, but not in a way the underworld would monitor. Isabella, after a lifetime in a wheelchair, understood vulnerability better than anyone. She agreed. The meeting at the gallery was a masterpiece of subtle theater. Isabella arrived, elegant and sharp, her wheelchair commanding the space. Chloe, professionally nervous, gave her a tour. They talked about art, about boundaries, both physical and social. Isabella, with expert precision, shared just enough, hinting at a protective older brother, at a life altered in an instant, to create a bond of shared understanding without ever mentioning Marco's name. Chloe found herself disarmed, drawn to this intelligent, wounded woman. As Isabella left, she took Chloe's hand. "The world has hard edges, my dear. Sometimes the kindest people are the ones who have been cut by them the most." The words landed with profound weight on Chloe. She didn't know why, but she felt, for the first time since the vandalism, a sense of safety. But the puppet master was still moving. The next escalation was both brutal and brilliantly indirect. Chloe's father, a retired mechanic living quietly in Florida, received a visit. Two polite men in suits asked questions about his daughter's new life in New York, her connections, her generous benefactors. They implied she might be involved in something unsavory. They didn't threaten. They just asked. And then they left. When Chloe's terrified father called her, the last pillar of her normal life crumbled. They had found her family. The violation was complete. She sat in the ruined gallery after hanging up, surrounded by shredded artwork, and wept from sheer helpless rage. Then the rage crystallized into resolve. She was done being a pawn. She confronted Anya. She had noticed the new security consultant's unusual vigilance, her focus less on insurance risks and more on people entering the gallery. Using a pretext about scheduling, Chloe went to the small office Anya used. She didn't beat around the bush. "Who do you work for?" Anya, trained for every contingency, maintained her cover. "The gallery's insurance firm, miss." Chloe slapped a printout on the desk. It was the society photo of Marco and Isabella. She had circled Isabella's face. "You arrived the week after I met him, the week after everything started happening. Don't lie to me." Anya's professional mask didn't slip, but her silence was confirmation enough. "Tell him," Chloe said, her voice trembling but clear, "that I want to talk. Tell him to stop sending proxies. Tell him I'm not a doll to be protected in a glass case. I'm in this now, whether I like it or not." Marco received the message through Victor, who delivered it with a look of stunned respect. "The girl has spine," Victor muttered. Marco felt a surge of something unexpected, pride and a deep, unsettling fear for her safety. Meeting her was a terrible idea. It would confirm every enemy's suspicion. It would paint the brightest possible target on her back. But she was right. She was already in it. Keeping her in the dark was now more dangerous than bringing her into the light, however carefully. He sent a reply through Anya. A time, a place. A public park at noon. No security visible, just two people who owed each other an explanation. The morning of the meeting, Marco received the final critical piece of intelligence. His tech team, digging through layers of encrypted chatter, found the source of the gallery vandalism. It wasn't a rival syndicate. It was a person, the widow of the business partner Alessandro, the man Marco had crippled in the warehouse. She hadn't hired muscle. She'd paid two street kids to do the damage and paint the specific phrase, using information gleaned from her husband's old notebooks. Her motive wasn't territory, it was raw, personal vengeance. She wanted to weaponize Marco's one moment of public kindness to destroy him. She was the puppet master, and she had almost succeeded in starting a war. This changed everything. The threat wasn't organizational. It was personal, erratic, and therefore unpredictable. And she still had access to her husband's old networks. She could strike again at anyone at any time. Marco walked into the park knowing two things. He had to protect Chloe from a threat he now understood, and he had to do it by finally telling the truth. He saw her sitting on a bench by the pond, looking younger and more vulnerable than he remembered, but with a defiant set to her jaw. This was the consequence of a smile in a bar. This was the human cost of a single deviation from a ruthless script. As he sat down beside her, the distance between the feared kingpin and the young woman from Brooklyn evaporated. They were just two people caught in a storm that started with a chair, and the only way out was through. For a long moment they just sat there, the park sounds filling the space between them. Children laughing, distant traffic, the quack of ducks on the pond. Then Marco Santoro began to speak, not as an emperor but as a man offering a confession. He told Chloe everything, not the sanitized version but the brutal, unvarnished truth. He explained his world, the economy of fear, the code he lived by. He told her about Alessandro's betrayal, about the warehouse, about the ashen taste of that kind of victory. And then he told her about Isabella, about the argument, the bullet, the wheelchair, and the 7 years of silence. His voice didn't waver, but the pain in it was a living thing. "When I saw you in that chair," he said, staring at his hands, "I didn't see a threat. I saw my sister before I broke everything. I saw a chance to make a different choice." Chloe listened, her initial anger cooling into a complex, aching understanding. The monster from the stories had a history, a wound, a reason. "The vandalism at the gallery," she said quietly. "That was meant for you," Marco nodded. "It was, and I didn't stop it in time. I'm sorry." He then told her about the widow, about her personal vendetta and the dangerous game she was playing. "She's the immediate threat, not Karloff. She's unpredictable, and she knows about you now." Chloe absorbed this, the fear returning but tempered now with knowledge. "What happens now?" she asked. Marco laid out his plan. It had 2 parts. The first part was protection. Anya would remain, but openly now, as a personal security detail Chloe would agree to hire. There would be no more shadows. Isabella would become a frequent, public visitor to the gallery, a benign and logical connection. The goal was to make Chloe appear as a protected asset of the Santoro family, not a hidden weakness. In the logic of this world, a publicly guarded person is harder to touch than a secret one. The second part of the plan involved the widow. Marco would not confront her with violence. He would offer her a deal, a substantial financial settlement, drawn from Alessandro's own hidden assets that Marco had located, in exchange for her silence and her departure from New York. It was clean, legal, and removed her motive. He was using his power not to punish, but to resolve. Chloe agreed to the protection, but she had a condition of her own. "I finish my show," she said, her voice firm. "Unseen Boundaries opens in 3 weeks. No more delays, no more mysterious interventions. If I'm going to be a public symbol, let it be for my work, not for my connection to you." Marco looked at her, seeing not a victim but an ally. He agreed. The following weeks were a masterclass in controlled transition. Marco's meeting with the widow was held in a lawyer's office. He presented her with forensic evidence of her husband's theft and a choice: take the settlement and start over somewhere far away, or face financial ruin and legal complications. She took the money. The personal threat dissolved. With that resolved, Marco reached out to Karloff again, this time with a business proposition. Instead of fighting over the meatpacking district, they would jointly invest in a new, high-end security consultancy, legitimizing a portion of their operations. Karloff, the corporate-minded opportunist, saw the long-term value. The business war turned into a partnership. But the most significant transformation was happening within Marco's own empire. With Victor's reluctant help, he began restructuring. He divested from the most morally ambiguous protection rackets, offering buyouts to long-term employees and shifting capital into the legitimate consultancy and real estate. It was a risky, expensive process. Some clients left, fearing the new approach lacked teeth, but others, weary of perpetual drama, stayed. The foundation of his power began to shift, brick by brick, from fear to reliability. Chloe's gallery show became the unexpected symbol of this change. Unseen Boundaries opened to critical acclaim. The centerpiece was a stunning mixed-media installation about territorial lines in social spaces, subtly inspired by her own experience. Marco attended the opening, not as a lurking shadow, but as a guest, accompanied by Isabella. He wore a simple suit, not his usual armor. He didn't monopolize Chloe's attention. He simply viewed the art, nodded respectfully to her, and left early. The message to the watching world was clear. His interest was professional, respectful, and above board. The rumor mill, deprived of salacious fuel, slowly ground to a halt. 6 months after the night at the vault, the new security consultancy, Santoro and Karloff Strategic Protection, landed its first major corporate client. Marco stood in a glass-walled conference room, giving a presentation on risk assessment, his language filled with terms like liability mitigation and asset safeguarding. He was becoming what he'd once pretended to be, a legitimate businessman. After the meeting, Karloff clapped him on the shoulder, a genuine gesture. "Never thought I'd see the day, Santoro. You're a better negotiator than you were a fighter." It was the highest compliment Karloff could give. That evening, Marco visited Isabella in her adapted Brooklyn apartment. They shared a meal, a now regular occurrence. The silence between them was finally gone, replaced by easy, sometimes difficult conversation. Isabella looked at her brother across the table. "You look tired," she said, "but you look lighter." Marco smiled, a real one. "The walls are different," he said. "They let in more light." Chloe's life found a new, stable rhythm. The gallery show led to real career opportunities. She dated a soft-spoken graphic designer who knew nothing about her strange interlude with the underworld. She still had lunch with Isabella every other week, a genuine friendship that existed separately from Marco. She was safe, successful, and finally free of the unseen boundaries that had once trapped her. The final act of the story brings us back to the vault, 1 year to the day after the initial incident. Marco walked in alone. His corner chair was empty. He didn't sit in it. He took a seat at the bar. Leo, the bouncer, now head of security for the new consultancy, gave him a nod. The bartender placed his usual drink in front of him without a word. The social ecosystem had recalibrated. He was still respected, but the fear had been dialed down, replaced by something closer to authentic regard. And then the surprising detail. The door opened and Chloe walked in. She was meeting Jess for a drink, a celebration of her own, a curator position at a major museum. She saw Marco at the bar. There was no fear, no tension. She offered a small, genuine smile. He returned it with a nod. She moved to join Jess at a table across the room. Marco finished his drink, paid his tab, and stood to leave. As he passed her table, he paused. Not to speak, but to place a small, sealed envelope beside her water glass. Then he was gone. Chloe opened it later. Inside was not a note, not a threat, not money. It was a gift certificate made out in her name for a renowned artist's retreat in upstate New York. It was paid in full. The attached card bore only 2 words in elegant print: "For boundaries." It was an investment in her art, in her future, with no strings attached. The ultimate gesture from a man who had learned that the strongest power isn't control. It's the ability to empower someone else without needing anything in return. The hook that started this story, a woman taking a feared man's seat, was never about the seat. It was about the crack it created in a hardened shell. That crack let light into Marco Santoro's life, light that illuminated a path out of the darkness he'd built for himself. It forced Chloe Bennett to confront invisible forces and discover her own strength. Their collision didn't end in ruin. It initiated a chain of transformations that altered an entire ecosystem. The psychology research was right. Unexpected kindness is the most underrated agent of change. That night at the vault, a single moment of restraint over instinct rewrote multiple futures. The story resolves not with a bang, but with a quiet, sustained shift, the proof that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not what everyone expects. So what does this story of a chair, a bar, and an unexpected smile actually reveal? It shows that power structures are not monolithic fortresses. They are ecosystems, sensitive to the smallest disturbances. Marco Santoro's empire, built to withstand brute force, was nearly unraveled by a single act of perceived kindness. Not because kindness is weakness, but because it is unpredictable. It introduced a variable his world's code could not compute. The research we referenced earlier holds the key. High-status individuals who possess prestige, influence granted through respect and admiration, enjoy more stability and genuine loyalty than those who rely solely on dominance or fear-based control. For years, Marco operated on dominance. That night at the vault, he instinctively reached for prestige. He chose connection over correction. And in doing so, he initiated the most difficult project of his life: converting one form of power into another. This story is ultimately about translation, translating guilt into protection, translating fear into strategy, translating a personal wound into a reason for restraint rather than an excuse for more violence. Chloe translated her terror into research, her vulnerability into art, and her position as a pawn into a partnership of mutual respect. Their collision forced a translation of an entire social language, from one of unspoken threats to one of visible, if complicated, boundaries. The lingering question isn't whether kindness can change the world. The evidence suggests it can. The deeper question is whether we recognize the moments when we have the capacity to be kind, especially when every instinct and social script tells us to be hard. Those moments are rarely grand gestures. They are quiet decisions. To not assert dominance, to not correct a minor slight, to offer a smile instead of a scowl. They are the decisions that, like a crack in a dam, can redirect the flow of an entire life. Marco and Chloe's paths diverged after that final meeting at the bar. They moved in separate circles, their connection reduced to occasional, respectful nods at public events. But the invisible boundary they crossed together remained permanently altered. The chair in the corner of the vault lost its aura of untouchable power. It became, simply, a chair, a testament to the fact that the rules we think are written in stone are often just written in fear, and they can be rewritten with a single, conscious choice. Your life is filled with these unseen boundaries, the unspoken rules at your work, in your family, in your social circles. The story of Marco and Chloe asks you to consider, what would happen if you gently, consciously chose to cross one, not with rebellion but with a different kind of strength, the strength to be unexpected. The results might surprise you. If you found this journey into the psychology of power and the ripple effects of a single choice compelling, make sure you're subscribed. We deconstruct stories like this every week, uncovering the hidden forces that shape our lives and relationships. Tell us in the comments, what unseen boundary have you encountered? Your perspective adds to this ongoing conversation. Thanks for watching.